Some children grow up surrounded by love, while others spend their entire childhood asking one heartbreaking question. Why didn't anyone want me? This is the story of a little boy whose family abandoned him, never imagining that one day the truth would leave them with a regret they could never erase. Rain poured heavily over the city as a 7-year-old boy sat quietly on the cold steps of an old orphanage. His tiny backpack held only a worn-out teddy bear, a faded family photograph, and a handwritten note that simply read, "Please take care of him. We can't anymore." There was no name, no explanation, and no promise that anyone would ever return. The little boy's name was Noah. Every evening he sat beside the orphanage gate, believing his mother would come back. And whenever a car slowed down outside, hope filled his eyes. Every sound of approaching footsteps made his heart race, but every single day ended exactly the same. No one came. Weeks turned into months. 5, and months slowly became years. One by one, the other children found loving families, packed their bags, hugged the caretakers, and left the orphanage with smiles on their faces. Noah always smiled and waved goodbye, but after the gate closed behind them, he quietly walked back to his empty bed and cried himself to sleep. He never asked why nobody chose him because deep inside he had already convinced himself of the answer. Maybe I'm just not worth loving. Those painful words became the silent voice that followed him everywhere. One cold winter morning, while helping clean the orphanage library, Noah discovered an old wooden box hidden behind a dusty bookshelf. Curious, he opened it and found dozens of handwritten letters left behind by children who had once lived there. Every letter carried the same heartbreaking wish. One said, "I hope someone loves me." Another read, "I hope my mom remembers my birthday." A third whispered, "I hope next Christmas I won't be alone." As Noah read each letter, he realized he wasn't the only child carrying invisible pain. That night, instead of writing about sadness, he began writing stories filled with hope. Every evening after everyone had fallen asleep, he filled notebook after notebook with stories about lonely children finding happiness, broken families learning to love again, and impossible dreams finally coming true. They were the endings he wished his own life could have. Years passed, and Noah finally turned 18. The orphanage could no longer keep him. He packed the same tiny backpack he had arrived with 11 years earlier. The teddy bear was old and worn, the family photograph had almost completely faded, but the small handwritten note remained safely, folded inside his pocket. Just before he left, the elderly caretaker, Mrs. Helen, stopped him and quietly handed him an old envelope. "I've been waiting many years to give you this," she whispered. Noah looked at her in confusion. "What is it?" he asked softly. Mrs. Helen lowered her eyes before answering. "It was left here the same day you arrived." Noah's hands trembled as he slowly opened the envelope. Inside was another letter. This one was written in his mother's handwriting. "My beautiful son, if you're reading this, it means you're finally old enough to understand why I left you. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I was dying. Your father had already abandoned us. I had no money, no family, and only a few weeks left to live. Leaving you here was the hardest decision I ever made. Every night I prayed that someone would give you the life I never could. Please don't hate me. My greatest wish is that one day you'll forgive me. I have loved you every second of your life, forever. Mom." Tears rolled down Noah's face as he read every word. For 11 long years, he had believed he wasn't loved, but the truth was far more heartbreaking than he had ever imagined. His mother hadn't abandoned him because she didn't care. She had sacrificed everything because she loved him too much to let him suffer beside her. For the first time in his life, Noah cried not because he felt unwanted, but because he finally understood what true love really looked like. He carefully folded the letter, placed it beside the old teddy bear inside his backpack, and walked into the world carrying both unbearable pain and a small spark of hope. But Noah had no idea that someone from his past had been searching for him for years, and what they were about to reveal would change his life forever. Noah stepped out of the orphanage carrying nothing but a small backpack, an old teddy bear, and the 2 letters that had changed his life forever. He had no family, no home, and no one waiting for him. The first few months were the hardest days he had ever known. He slept in homeless shelters, worked whatever small jobs he could find, and often skipped meals just to save enough money to pay for a tiny room. Many nights he sat alone, staring at the stars, wondering if life would ever become easier. But whenever he felt like giving up, he unfolded his mother's letter and read the words, "Live the life I never could." Those simple words became the strength that carried him through every difficult day. Years passed, and Noah never became successful overnight. He simply worked harder than everyone else. During the day, he delivered packages across the city, and every night he sat beside a small lamp writing stories. They were stories about lonely children, broken families, second chances, forgiveness, and hope. He poured every painful memory from his own childhood into those pages. One evening, a small publishing company agreed to print his first book. Nobody believed it would succeed, not even Noah himself. But within weeks, thousands of people were reading it. Readers cried through every chapter because the emotions felt so real. The book became a bestseller. Then came another and another after that. Within 5 years, Noah had become one of the most loved authors in the country. Yet success never changed the person he was. He didn't buy a mansion or expensive cars. Instead, he used his earnings to build a beautiful orphanage where every child had a warm bed, good food, caring teachers, and people who truly loved them. Above the entrance hung a simple sign that read, "No child is unwanted." Every child who arrived received a small teddy bear just like the one Noah had carried since he was 7 years old, because he wanted each of them to know that someone cared. One rainy afternoon, an elderly man walked slowly into the orphanage. His clothes were old, his hands trembled with age, and his eyes were filled with guilt. In a quiet voice, he asked the receptionist, "Is Noah here?" A few moments later, Noah entered the room. The old man looked at him for only a second before bursting into tears. "I don't expect forgiveness," he whispered. "I only wanted to see you once before I die." Noah stood silently until something caught his attention. The old family photograph inside his wallet showed the very same man, standing beside his mother many years ago. His heart stopped for a moment. The stranger sitting before him was his father, the man who had disappeared long before Noah was old enough to remember his face. Lowering his head in shame, the old man finally spoke. "I was young. I was selfish. I ran away because I was afraid of responsibility. When your mother died, I came back looking for you, but by then no one could tell me where you were. I've lived with that regret every single day of my life." The room fell completely silent. Years of pain, loneliness, unanswered questions, and broken memories stood between them. After what felt like forever, Noah finally spoke. "When I was a little boy, I waited outside the orphanage every evening because I believed my parents would come back for me. I waited for years." His father's tears flowed even faster. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," he cried. Noah looked at him quietly before reaching into his backpack. He pulled out his mother's letter and gently placed it into his father's shaking hands. "She never hated you," Noah said softly. "She only hoped that one day I would have a better life." The old man broke down completely. Noah took a deep breath before saying, "I can't change the past, and I can't become the little boy who waited at that orphanage gate every evening, but I can choose not to carry hatred for the rest of my life." Then, without another word, he stepped forward and hugged his father. The pain hadn't disappeared, but forgiveness had finally become stronger than the years of sorrow. Months later, Noah's father began volunteering at the orphanage every weekend. He read bedtime stories to children who had no parents, and sometimes he quietly wiped away tears because he understood better than anyone what it meant to lose the people who mattered most. One evening, a little boy looked up at Noah and asked, "Do you think my parents loved me?" Noah smiled gently, knelt beside him, and replied, "Sometimes people leave because they stop caring, but sometimes they leave because life gives them no other choice. Never measure your worth by who stayed or who walked away. Your value was never decided by someone else's decision." The little boy smiled through his tears, and for the first time, he truly believed those words. As the sun slowly disappeared behind the orphanage, the sound of children's laughter filled the air. Noah looked toward the sky, holding his mother's letter close to his heart, and whispered, "Oh, Mom, I finally understand. You didn't leave me because you stopped loving me. You let me go because your love was bigger than your fear." And for the very first time since he was 7 years old, Noah no longer felt abandoned. He finally felt loved.